Listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's March the 26th, 85th day of the year. Only 280 days remain till this year's over with. And holidays and observances, I'm just hitting the high points, folks. National Science Appreciation Day, World Math Day, Purple Day, Good Hair Day, National Spinach Day, Manatee Appreciation Day, National Nougat Day, and Make Up Your Own Holiday Day, Live Long and Prosper Day, Little Red Wagon Day. Now, we've been talking the last few shows about unsolved mysteries. And there are far more than you would think. We're going to be talking about some more of them today. Now, in our last show, of course, we covered such things as the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Who was D.B. Cooper? Now, these are things that have been millions of dollars spent. And I understand they've just reopened the search for MH370 again. Now, in addition to those type of mysteries, let's talk about strange sightings. You have to ask yourself, to what extent does a mystery reside in the witness? Well, we're going to discuss accounts of strange phenomena. Everything from demonic creatures apprehended by medieval peasants to lights in the sky and even bizarre monsters. We're going to start out talking about something that was raised quite a bit of interest in the United Kingdom. And it ran from 1837 to 1904. And I'm talking about Spring Hill Jack, the Victorian-era boogeyman of urban legend. Took on a lot of forms, but always distinguished by an incredible ability to jump unbelievable distances. Now, Spring Hill Jack was the name given by the popular press to a mass fiend that terrorized Victorian Britons for nearly 70 years. And you might notice that a lot of the names we've come to take as kind of standard for various mysteries actually were created by the popular press. Now, Spring Hill Jack was almost certainly a figment of the cultural imagination, what sociologists have come to call a collective delusion. Reports of the apparition varied widely, but all shared one common feature. This mystery assailant could perform superhuman leaps as though he or it had springs in on his heels. And Spring Hill Jack certainly was not the first of such urban legendary bogeymen. And almost certainly, he's not the last. Now, mystery assailants are a surprisingly common feature of societies all over the world, and in fact throughout history. They feature in social panics that tend to follow a similar pattern. A minor but unusual report of a frightening encounter with otherworldly elements stimulates further reporters, but spark life into a media frenzy. And this, in turn, disseminates both the threat of attack and the cultural vocabulary used to articulate the experience, becoming, in fact, a self-sustaining process. The only physical consequences of supposed encounters proved to be exaggerated, unrelated, or even potentially self-inflicted. And pinning down witnesses with genuine first-hand reports proves to be literally impossible. Eventually, the panic dies down without resolution, although it could easily flare up again at a different location with minimal provocation. First recorded encounters with Spring Hill Jack came in December of 1837. The paper, the Morning Chronicle, reported the appearance of some scoundrel disguised in a bearskin and wearing spring shoes, jumping to and fro in front of foot passengers in the neighborhood of Lewisham. Apparently the locals had taken to calling him Steel Jack. Next few weeks, similar apparitions were reported in various parts of London with widely varying description, including in the shape of a white bull, in the form of a white bear dressed in polished steel armor, and even in the form of an immense baboon 6 feet high with enormous eyes. Though not always present, a white or shiny costume was emerging as another common thread among all these appearances. January of 1838, the rumpus gained wider credibility with the Times. Reported on a letter read out by the Lord Mayor of London, Sir John Cowan, who claimed that some individuals have laid a wager that a marvelous and foolhardy companion durst not take upon the task of visiting many of the villages near London in 3 disguises: a ghost, a bear, and a devil. This unmanly villain had succeeded in depriving 7 ladies of their senses. Well, the next brought perhaps the definitive encounter with Jane Alsop. A teenager from London's East End heard what she thought was a policeman crying from the street, "For God's sakes, bring me a light. We've caught Spring Hill Jack here in the lane." And when she opened the front door and handed the cloaked figure a candle, he revealed his full monstrosity, which, according to the Times, had eyes that resembled red balls of fire, a helmet of some sort, and a costume which appeared to fit him very tight and seemed to resemble white oilskin. Well, this ghastly apparition vomited forth a quantity of blue and white flames from his mouth and clawed her, tearing her gown with his claws, which she was certain were of some metallic substance. Well, the attack on Jane Alsop gained widespread notoriety, and London was in such a ferment that winter that the Duke of Wellington organized special patrols to reassure the populace. And, of course, at that point in time, the Spring Hill Jack legend went viral, and he was cited around the country over the next few decades. In the 1880s, he was a particular presence in the Midlands, according to a report from the Birmingham Post in September of 1886. According to that report, first a young girl and then a man felt a hand on their shoulder and turned to see the infernal one with a glowing face, bidding them a good evening. By this time, Jack had crossed over into fiction and folklore. He was a star of several penny dreadfuls, cheap illustrated serials, and even appeared in plays. His name became a generic term for robbers who made a quick getaway. Became a bogeyman with which parents could frighten recalcitrant children. Jack was always a popular nickname for shady characters, but in the late 1880s it acquired a darker association with the Ripper murders. That's why they called him Jack the Ripper. Maybe the last recorded sighting of Spring Hill Jack was in September 1904, when newspapers in Liverpool reported a figure seen jumping over a building in William Henry Street. So who or what was Spring Hill Jack? Now I've got my monitor deciding it's time to play its games. Try it one more time. There we go. Well, in 1838, there was a letter to the Lord Mayor that suggested a suspect from the higher ranks of life. And in his book, The Legend and Bizarre Crimes of Spring Hill Jack, Author Peter Hainig suggested the culprit was the Marquis of Waterford, a well-known practical joker. But the most plausible explanation is that Jack was an example of a collective delusion. Of course, for those who came face to face with him, certainly he was not a delusion, but a very great reality. Well, an extraordinary but enduring explanation offered for Spring Hill Jack was the suggestion he was an extraterrestrial spaceman. The helmet and strange costume were a spacesuit, and his powerful leaps was evidence he came from a planet with a higher gravity than Earth. One of the earliest proponents of the spaceman theory is British actor Valentin Dial in a 1954 article for Everybody's Magazine. In that article, he argued it's significant that a high proportion of those who saw Spring Hill Jack were convinced that he was not of this world, but either a spirit or a visitor from some distant planet. This suggestion was taken up by a correspondent to the magazine, Edmund Race of Sheffield, who contended that a being reared on a planet whose gravity was far greater than on Earth would be able to leap colossal distances on this planet. And it was suggested that the alleged monster was a visitor from space who'd been marooned here, which, of course, is a interesting suggestion. Well, along with Spring Hill Jack, we've got a report of devil's footprints from Devonshire in England. This was the year 1855. It was midwinter in Victorian England, and bipedal hoofed tracks appeared overnight in fresh snow, traversing fields and gardens, seemingly unimpeded by walls or rivers. So, the suggestion was raised that maybe the devil was to blame. It all began the night of February 7th, 1855. Heavy snow had fallen in South Devon. That's in southwest England. Stopped at around midnight, and at first light the next morning, roughly 6 hours later, people across the countryside and settlements between Topsham and Totnes, including the towns of Lumpstone, Exmouth, Deegmouth, and Dawlish, noticed strange tracks in the snow. Meandered in an unbroken course over a distance of more than 100 miles. First reports of the tracks appeared in the February 17th edition of the local newspaper. It was included in a letter to the editor. And it said, "Sir, Thursday night, the 8th of February, was marked by a heavy fall of snow, followed by rain and boisterous wind from the east, and in the morning we had frost. The return of daylight revealed the ramblings of some most busy and mysterious animal, endowed with the power of ubiquity, as its footprints were to be seen in all sorts of unaccountable places, on the tops of homes, narrow walls and gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings, as well as in the open fields." Now, this letter went on to describe the prints, which appeared more like that of a biped than a quadruped. The steps were generally 8 inches in advance of each other, though in some cases 12 or 14, and or alternate like steps of a man, which would be included between two parallel lines 6 inches apart. Impression of the foot closely resembles that of a donkey's shoe, and measures from 1.5 inches to, in some cases, 2.5 inches across, here and there appearing as if the foot was cleft. But in generality of its steps, the impression of the shoe is continuous and perfect. In the center, the snow remains entire, merely showing the outer crust of the foot, which therefore must have been convex. Although the tone of the letter was jolly enough, it added the chilling detail that the creature seems to have advanced to the doors of several houses and then to have retraced its steps. The rector of St. George, the Reverend H.T. Ellicombe, went on to become one of the principal investigators of the phenomenon, recorded a further disturbing fact. Said it was as if the snow had been branded with a hot iron to the ground, which was everywhere visible, though the snow in the middle part didn't appear to be touched. Maybe inevitably, dark suspicions of the devil's hand were being entertained. People in the district were generally frightened, according to Truman's Exeter Flying Post, which described the affair as an excitement worthy of the Dark Ages. A group of tradesmen from Dawlish were sufficiently alarmed to arm themselves with guns and bludgeons and followed the tracks to Lushcombe, Dawlish Water, and Oaklands. Said at length, after a very long and weary search, they returned as wise as they set out. Henrietta Fursden, daughter of the vicar of Dawlish, later recalled seeing the footprints and said her terror as a child of the unknown wild beasts that might be lurking about and the servants who wouldn't go out after dark to shut out her doors. Well, some local clergy were later accused of stirring up superstitious fears as part of a sectarian struggle then underway in the region, which had seen some of the affected parishes fall under the sway of an Anglo-Catholic cleric. More sober heads preferred to look for natural explanations, of course. But mitigating against such were the more extraordinary facets of the case. Ellicott noted that the creature had made thousands of these marks on the snow, extended over many miles. Later claimed that the tracks extended over 100 miles, wandering around gardens and some villages and tracing a single line across the countryside, passing unimpeded through impenetrable thickets, along the tops of walls and roofs, through narrow drain pipes, and even supposedly crossing the River Exe without breaking stride. I mean, what kind of animal could produce such singular tracks without regard to the laws of physics? Well, the eminent naturalist Sir Robert Owen, to whom Ellicott sent drawings of the tracks and even a sample of white grape-sized excrement, suggested the badgers were to blame. These animals, while walking, he pointed out, carefully placed their hind paws in the prints made by their forepaws, giving their tracks the illusion of being bipedal. Now, badgers don't have hooves, but maybe some artifact of thawing and refreezing could account for the apparently uniform shape of the marks. Ellicott himself suggested birds with ice-encrusted feet. Multiple other culprits were considered, including donkeys and seagulls and even migratory eels. But none of these candidates could possibly explain all the strange features of the phenomena. What if these weird features were not what they seemed, however? Exeter University research fellow and folklorist Theo Brown later investigated the episode thoroughly, revisiting many of the witness reports and becoming rather skeptical. She suggested that reports of the trail being continuous, uniform, were exaggerated. Maybe the tracks appeared over several days, but interviewees preferred not to let the truth get in the way of an exciting fable. All the people concerned are quite content to leave the thing in the air rather than spoil a good story, according to Brown. To this day, nobody's offered an explanation which takes into account all the available evidence. Even if a single-footed track only covered a part of the distance, we still have no idea what creature could possibly have made it. The conventional conclusion is that the mystery of the devil's footprints is impossible to solve because of the singular nature of the phenomena. But in fact, there have been similar reports since. Ralph of Coggeshall, a 13th century chronicler, reported the appearance of strange hoof prints in the earth after a lightning storm July 19th in the year 1205. If they were somehow buried or burned into the ground by lightning, it would recall the branded nature of the devil's footprints. Polar explorer Captain Sir James Clark Ross recorded that a survey party had landed at Kerguelen Island near the South Pole in May of 1840. They reported seeing the tracks of an ass or a donkey, despite the absence of any such animals on the island. Illustrated London News reported March 12, 1855, that on the hill of Piaskava Gora in Galicia, modern-day Poland, every year to be seen in the snow the same hoof prints as those seen in Devonshire. As recently as March 2009, British newspapers reported marks in the shape of a cloven hoof found in a garden in Devon. Well, two of the more prominent theories as to the perpetrator of the devil's footprints were an escaped kangaroo or an errant balloon. The former suggestion arose because at the same time as the footprint flap, it was reported that some kangaroos had escaped from a private zoo belonging to Mr. Fish in Sidmouth. Now, kangaroos are mainly bipedal, so the escapees were fingered. In practice, the prints bore no resemblance in size or shape to those of a kangaroo. But, frankly, we don't let facts get in the way of a good story. Writer Godfrey Household claimed to have been told by the descendants of a work at the Devonshire dockyard that an experimental balloon, part of a classified project, don't you know, been accidentally released on the night of February 7th, suggesting its chain or mooring line had created the tracks as it trailed and bumped along the ground. Now, how could this account for the apparent uniformity of the prints is unclear, and supposedly the prevailing winds would not have pushed a balloon along the correct path either. But once again, let's not let the facts get in the way of a good story. Well, for those with a religious bent, let's talk about the miracle of Fatima in Portugal. The year was 1917. An apparition of the Virgin Mary entrusted 3 secrets to a shepherd girl, the third of which was said to have been hidden by the Vatican in their archives until the year 2000. Its disclosure failed to satisfy the many who believe that a true secret contains earth-shattering revelations. The story of the secrets of Fatima is one of prophecy, visions, and conspiracy that ties together supernatural apparitions, church politics, papal assassinations, and even the Cold War. Now, the story begins in 1917 with a series of visions experienced by a 10-year-old shepherdess, Lucia dos Santos, and her 2 companions, Francisco and Jacinta Marto, aged 9 and 7. It took place on a pasture near Fatima in Portugal. 3 children claimed to have seen a shining lady who told them to return at the same time every month to hear various homilies. Although the apparition, which turned out to be the Blessed Virgin Mary, swore them to secrecy, word quickly leaked out, and despite the skepticism and initial hostility of the church and civic authorities, increasing numbers of people began to accompany the 3 children. Only the children, and probably only Lucia, could actually see the apparition. Others claimed to have seen strange sights. The Blessed Virgin Mary announced that her last visit would be on October 13th, and an estimated 70,000 people turned up to witness what became known as the miracle of the sun. According to an account by journalist Avelino de Almeida, the sun looked like a plaque of dull silver, and it's possible to look at it without the least discomfort. At that moment, a great shout went up, a miracle, and the sun trembled, made sudden incredible movements outside all cosmic laws. It actually danced, according to the typical expression of the people. Others swore that the sun whirled on itself like a giant Catherine wheel. They had been wet and stormy, but the sun supposedly dried out the clothes of the throng in miraculous rapidity. Skeptics dismissed the miracle as a mix of optical and psychological and sociological phenomena. A sundog, an illusion where there appear to be multiple suns, eye movement, retinal distortion, and high-altitude cloud screening, and mutually reinforced mass psychogenic delusions, supposedly accounted for the visions. Significantly, Almeida reported people then began to ask each other what they'd seen. During an earlier apparition on July 13th, the Blessed Virgin Mary revealed to Lucia 3 secrets. The first was a vision of hell, and the second a warning that if Russia failed to turn toward the true faith, she would spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the church. These 2 secrets were revealed to the world in a memoir written by Lucia in 1941 and can hardly be regarded as genuine prophecies. She also hinted at a 3rd secret that she didn't reveal. Instead, it was sealed in an envelope with instructions that it wouldn't be opened until after 1960. In any event, the sealed envelope was passed to the Vatican, and although it was read by some popes and cardinals, it was not revealed to the public until the year 2000. In the meantime, though, the 3rd secret and the Fatima apparitions play a major role in drama surrounding the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. St. Peter's Square in Rome on May 13, 1981, the Pope was shot at 3 times by Mehmet Ali Aga. The first 2 shots were fired at his head and would almost certainly have killed him, except that at the crucial moment the pontiff's eyes were caught by an image of the Virgin Mary carried by a young girl, and he bent down to hug her. Now, officially, Aga was a lone gunman, but it's widely accepted the assassination attempts was coordinated by the Bulgarian Secret Service at the behest of the KGB, of course. It's part of a plot against a pope engaged in an anti-communist crusade. John Paul II was hit in the stomach by a third bullet, and his near-death experience led him to have a Blessed Virgin Mary-related mystical experience of his own. From his hospital room, he called for all the material relating to the Fatima visions and read the third secret for himself. And it apparently confirmed his near-messianic conviction that God had charged him to pursue a sacred battle against communism. Well, when the third secret was finally published, it proved to relate a vision of a bishop dressed in white, apparently the Holy Father. When he reached the top of the mountain on his knees at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. Maybe understandably, John Paul II had related this to his own experience, and the official Catholic line is that the third secret was indeed a prophecy of the attempted assassination of the pontiff. Well, the man responsible for disseminating the secret, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, recognized this may not have been the revelation people were expecting. And he wrote that the so-called Third Secret of Fatima, published here in its entirety long after the fact and by decision of the Holy Father, would probably prove disappointing or surprising after all the speculation it stirred. No great mysteries revealed, nor is the future unveiled. He was right, and today there exists a vigorous subculture, both within Catholicism and conspiracy circles, that insists that the Church is suppressing the true Third Secret of Fatima, or at least refusing to publish all of it. Speculation as to the true content tends to be either apocalyptic or to focus on reactionary criticism of the Catholic Church, particularly on liberalization introduced by the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. So was the Third Secret of Fatima revealed or not? There's a great deal of argument about it. Well, from Vatican secrets, let's turn to a lake in Scotland. We're talking about Loch Ness. The date's 1933. World's most famous lake monster can trace our ancestry back at least as far as the 6th century. But Nessie only came to international attention in the 1930s, remaining elusive but captivating nonetheless. It was September 13th, 1933. Mr. and Ms. McKay were driving along a newly opened road running alongside Scotland's biggest lake, Loch Ness, when they were startled by the apparition of a huge, slimy monster, about 33 feet long, with a head and neck like a big snake, which careened across the road and disappeared into the undergrowth. News reports of the encounter kick-started a media sensation, and the Loch Ness Monster was born. Well, this wasn't the first time that an aquatic monster had been associated with Loch Ness. According to the life of St. Columba, written by St. Adamnan, an abbot of Iona who died in 704, the Irish abbot and missionary Columba encountered such a beast in 565 A.D. According to what was written, the blessed man was obliged to cross the river Nessa, and when he reached the bank of the river, he saw some of the inhabitants burying an unfortunate man who was a short time before seized as he was swimming and bitten most severely by a monster that lived in the water. Bravely, the blessed man ordered somebody else to go in the water, but when the monster felt the water disturbed above by a man swimming, it suddenly rushed out with an awful roar. Undaunted, Columba made the sign of the cross, ordered the beast to go back with all speed, and at that point the monster was terrified and fled more quickly than if it had been pulled by ropes. And this wasn't the only marine monster Columba encountered, and Nessie is far from being the only monster to haunt the waterways of the world. Now, leaving aside the multitudes of sea monsters reported over the centuries, lake monsters have been reported from 250 of the world's lakes and rivers, 24 of them actually in Scotland. After Nessie, many of them have earned subsequents of their own, including Manipogo from Lake Manitoba in Canada, Champ from Lake Champlain on the U.S.-Canadian border, and the Migo of Lake Dakotuna in New Britain, although skeptics say this beast has been wrongly identified from video footage of a man standing up in a canoe. In Sweden, Lake Sturgeon is home to a fabled monster, which was the target of a sustained monster hunting campaign in the 1890s, after it was reported to have menaced young girls. Supposedly, a company was formed to try and trap the monster. Jetties were built, holes cut in the ice, and a Norwegian whaler armed with a harpoon was retained. Even they had a giant trap constructed, but to no avail. In 1957, it was claimed that the 19th century monster hunt had been a tall story fabricated to drum up tourism. Clearly, you have to admit that a lake monster is a powerful draw for tourists. In Scotland, the Mackay's tale and at least a wave of sightings and photographic evidence was soon to follow. 1934, Army Surgeon Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Robert Wilson took what's become known as the surgeon's photo. Black and white picture appeared to show the classic Nessie silhouette of a small head at the end of a serpentine body rising up above the surface of the water. Surgeon's photo is later revealed to be a hoax created by sticking a plastic model onto a toy submarine, but public enthusiasm for Nessie was undaunted. Interest flared up again in 1960 when Tim Dinsdale caught on film a humped object moving across the Loch, apparently at about 7 miles per hour. This was followed by sonar traces of an unidentified mass off Urquhart Castle. The most productive location for sightings was that particular area. In the 1970s, underwater cameras produced several sensational images, including what looked like a rhomboidal flipper and what appeared to be a long-necked flippered creature. With repeated expeditions to explore, scan, and probe the Loch, together with decades of surface observation, have failed to produce conclusive evidence that Nessie really exists. One problem is the Loch itself. A unique body of water with features that make it ideal for hiding a monster. It's 24 miles long and a mile wide. They have underwater connections to the sea. Use of sonar is difficult because of the great depth of the Loch, which is said to be as much as 975 feet in places. The canyons of its steeply ridged floor and its overhanging sides, which creates zones of sonar shadow. Visually scanning the Loch is equally challenging. The surface is frequently misty and the water is thick with particles of peat from the surrounding land, making underwater visibility close to nothing. The region is frequently overcast, and the water is in shadow. It's notoriously difficult to see below the surface or to judge distances accurately. Now, there are multiple problems with the theory that lake monsters like Nessie are prehistoric survivors. Firstly, Loch Ness is a cold freshwater lake, maybe not the best habitat for a marine reptile that's believed to have been cold-blooded. Even if some species of pleurosaur had survived the extinction that wiped out all its relatives, would have required a large breeding population to remain viable over millions of years. Loch Ness is too resource poor to support such a population, although believers argue that submarine tunnels connect the Loch to the open sea. What about monsters reported from even smaller lakes far from the sea, such as reported in Lake Van, high in the mountains of eastern Turkey? More to the point, a considerable population of large creatures which need to come to the surface to breathe would certainly not remain concealed from legions of monster hunters. No remains of any such animal have ever been found on the shore of the Loch. Alleged sea monster carcasses have been recovered from seas and seashores, but all these that have been investigated have been shown to be badly decomposed carcasses of non-cryptid animals such as basking sharks. Corpses of large sharks rot in a way that makes them look like a sea serpent, including even hair hanging off the neck, which are actually shreds of cartilage fiber. The most likely explanation for the lake monster sightings, such as Nessie, is misidentification of normal animals and other objects, combined with influences from folklore traditions of monsters. Scotland, for instance, has a long tradition of kelpies, horse-like fairy creatures that live in lakes. Non-cryptozoological stimuli blamed for monster sightings include misidentified sturgeon, seals or otters, floating logs, the hulls of upturned boats, or lumps of rotting vegetation buoyed up by methane, giant conger eels, oarfish, or dragonfish, rare types of deep-sea fish. It can be many feet in length. Many waterspouts or rows of leaping porpoises. which could in fact look like a hump monster. Well, far and away the most popular candidate for the identity of Nessie is some species of plesiosaur, marine reptile from the era of the dinosaurs. It fits many of the classic descriptions. They had oval bodies with flippers and long necks with small heads, kind of like a couple of congressmen we've seen on the news many times, and long necks with. But there are many other types of water monsters reported around the world. Cryptozoologists, those who study conventionally unrecognized creatures, agree that most of them must be prehistoric survivors, ancient species that might have escaped extinction. Along with the plesiosaurs, other candidates include paleosaurs, giant marine reptiles, zygolodonts, prehistoric whales with sinuous bodies, and giant otters, and an unknown species of long-necked seal. As for the extinction, maybe nobody told them they're dead. Well, from Nessie, let's talk about UFOs and the mysterious Area 51. The UFOs, though they've been around with us throughout history, really got their start in 1947 in the USA when pilot Kenneth Hudnall spotted what he called unidentified flying objects, which have widely believed to be extraterrestrial spacecraft. It spawned a subculture of conspiracy theories about government cover-ups and secret UFO bases, and even alien abductions. Over 100,000 people reported a UFO sighting over the last 70 years, and opinion polls revealed that about half the population of America and other Western countries believe UFOs are alien spacecraft, with about a quarter convinced aliens have already made contact. Usually they imply governments are covering up this fact, and the theory UFOs are spaceships piloted by aliens from another planet has been called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Well, the UFO phenomena dates back to June 24th, 1947, when, as I mentioned before, the landmark sighting of Kenneth Hudnall, the businessman and experienced private pilot, made his well-known sighting. Flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, northwestern United States, he noticed a chain of 9 peculiar-looking aircraft. The vehicles seemed to be moving at fantastic speeds, weaving in and out of the peaks. He observed they would seem bat-winged or crescent-shaped and moved like saucers skipping over the water. On landing, he reported his sighting to the military, and the press soon got hold of the story. Anonymous headline writer coined the phrase flying saucer, and the phenomenon was born. Arnold was a convincing witness, giving careful estimates of the size and distance and speed of these strange objects, which he interpreted as experimental aircraft. In fact, it seems highly likely that Arnold actually saw a flock of American white pelicans, birds with profile and flying style correspond exactly to his 1947 description. Within 6 weeks of his report, UFO sightings are being reported at a rate of about 160 a day. Keep in mind, if you will, that if the second coming happened, skeptics would report it was something else, probably a bird or swamp gas. Although ufology is very much a post-World War II phenomenon, researchers trace its antecedents much further back. Led by writer Eric von Däniken, a minor industry has grown up around the ancient astronaut hypothesis, in which ancient mysteries are interpreted through the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It places the first encounters with UFOs in prehistoric times, and even posits an extraterrestrial role in creating the human species through genetic engineering. Historical records have also been mined for relevant encounters. Some medieval chronicles report strange encounters with sky ships, similar to conventional ocean-going ones, which let down ladders and interacted with humans. According to Agobard, the 9th century bishop of Lyson, many people believe there was a land in the clouds called Magonia, from which ships navigating on clouds set sail. Late 19th century, many newspapers, especially in America, reported the waves or sightings of mystery airships Vehicles like dirigibles, but seeming far more advanced, often bearing people dressed in futuristic outfits. Most of the reports were fakes or hoaxes dreamed up by newspaper editors or local liars' clubs where gentlemen would gather to amuse one another with tall tales. During World War II, Allied pilots reported many encounters with inexplicable aerial phenomena, even giving them a nickname, the Foo Fighters. Common feature of UFO reports has always been technology just beyond the capabilities of the day. Hence airships in the 19th century and spaceships in the 20th. Arnold sightings kicked off what's known as the golden age of ufology. Thousands of people reported daylight discs, flying saucers seen in daylight. U.S. Air Force opened its own investigation called Project Blue Book, which ended up explaining away most sightings as misidentification of normal phenomena. Ufologists began to believe the government was engaged in the cover-up, and such suspicions came to focus in one particular event, the 1947 Roswell, New Mexico incident. Just 2 weeks after Arnold's sightings, on July 8th, the Roswell Daily Record reported an extraordinary headline. Roswell Army Airfield captures flying saucer on ranch in the Roswell region. Air Force was confirming that a flying saucer had crashed the previous week and its occupants had been taken into custody. But that same afternoon, a military press conference announced that saucer wreckage was nothing more than a downed weather balloon. And if you believe that, I got a bridge I want to sell you. Roswell case later became to assume a central position in the UFO mythology, which when it was reinvestigated in the 1980s. People who claimed to have worked at Roswell Army Airfield said they'd seen autopsies carried out on alien corpses. A film of this later emerged that proved to be a crude hoax. Further claimed that the technology recovered from the crash had been spirited away to a top-secret military research base at Area 51, part of the Groom Lake military testing ground. Area 51's acknowledged as a research facility where the U-2 spy plane and a stealth bomber were developed. To ufologists, however, it's also where the recovered alien technology was taken for reverse engineering, the process of working backward from super advanced alien technology to arrive at technology that humans can understand and use. Since become the site of a secret alien base buried beneath the Nevada desert. Most likely explanation for the Roswell case is that it really was a crash balloon, possibly from a top-secret high-altitude radar balloon project underway at Roswell in 1947. At the same time, it's now come to light that the photographs of the so-called weather balloon wreckage was actually a cover for what was really discovered. Despite the increasingly lurid and baroque developments of ufologists that attend the conspiracy culture, nearly 70 years of UFO research has failed to reveal convincing proof of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Most UFO sightings can be seen as simple misidentification of natural phenomena. Common culprits include celestial bodies, ground-based light sources, aircraft, and atmospheric effects such as odd clouds and mirages. Photos and videos of flying saucers are usually revealed as hoaxes or similar misidentification. Witness testimony recovered under hypnosis, which forms the basis of alien abduction phenomena, is generally explained as false memory syndrome, where the interviewer consciously or otherwise suggests a narrative that is then claimed and elaborated on by the subject. There is some evidence that government agencies such as the CIA or military intelligence made use of ufology as a means to propagate misinformation about genuine classified research projects. Theory that the UFO phenomena can be explained as anomalous perceptions interpreted through the lens of culture and social expectations and narratives is known as the psychosocial hypothesis. And according to this, UFO sightings have a psychological origin, such as a hallucination or misidentification, and then are interpreted by the witness according to their social and cultural backgrounds. At the same time, there are others who swear that what they saw was something out of this world. From the 1970s, ufology began to get increasingly weird. Witnesses more frequently reported strange and even supernatural phenomena attending UFO encounters, and a new strain of UFO belief emerged, alien abduction. Under hypnosis, many subjects reported experiencing nighttime visits from aliens, mostly described as having small bodies with large heads and tiny features. Except for large oval or teardrop-shaped eyes, often called grays from the color of their skin. Classic abductee narrative involves being spirited into a spaceship and then probed or experimented on. Well, some ufologists link the abductee phenomenon to reports of cattle mutilation, where cows were found with body parts missing, apparently removed with surgical precision, and often associated with sightings of UFOs and even black helicopters, believed to be covert government forces. An overarching narrative, sometimes called the dark side hypothesis, emerged, claiming that aliens and human governments were engaged in a global conspiracy to create an alien-human hybrid, maintaining secret alien bases on Earth and maybe prepare the planet for colonization or even takeover. Area 51 is often pinpointed as the location of one of these bases, concealing a vast underground complex where government agencies collude with the aliens to conduct experiments in genetic manipulation as well as mind control technology. All right, from aliens, let's turn to talk about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and the Yeti. And they're reported worldwide. And we started seeing reports about them in the 1950s. 8 men have been reported all over the world, but are particularly well known in America and in the Himalayas. But you have to ask yourself, are these hoaxes, misidentifications, or evidence of surviving prehistoric hominids? 8 men are large, hairy, man-like creatures. Best known types, of course, are Bigfoot and the Yeti, but there are dozens of others that have been reported, from Hawaii, New Zealand, to Venezuela, and Africa. Typical report describes a 10-foot-tall creature with a large head, heavy brows, and long ape-like arms, covered in brown or black fur, and often smells repulsive. Some types, such as the Orang Pendek, or Little Man of Sumatra, much smaller, about 4 feet high. Several explorers reported Bushmen in America in the 18th and 19th centuries, but the Bigfoot story really got started in 1958 when a huge humanoid footprint was found in Humboldt County, Northern California. There are those that say it was a hoax, but it triggered a national obsession with a creature swiftly christened as Bigfoot, also called Sasquatch or Wendigo, after creatures in Native American folklore. It's estimated that over 1,000 Americans claim to have seen Bigfoot, with most reports coming from states in the Northwest. Obviously, this region has the most forested wilderness, but Bigfoot apparently refuses to be bound by biogeographical common sense. Insists on appearing in practically every state in America. One well-known example is the Florida skunk ape. Gets its name from the terrible smell reported by witnesses. One of the most famous Bigfoot encounters is that of Albert Ostman, who claimed to have been kidnapped by a family of Sasquatches in 1924. He managed to escape by feeding snuff to one of them, causing a sneezing fit. Some Bigfoot witnesses even claimed to have shot one, but hard evidence remains frustratingly hard to come by, despite finds such as hair and droppings and even alleged Bigfoot footprints. Reports of an ape-man in the Himalayas date back at least as far as the 14th century, but the Yeti only really hit the headlines in 1921 when British explorer Lieutenant Colonel C.K. Howard Bury spotted some strange creatures on a distant snowfield in the Everest region. When he discovered huge footprints at the same spot, his porters told him they belonged to a creature known as the Beto Kongmi, later erroneously translated by reporters abominable snowman. Himalayan ape-man has since become known as the Yeti, which according to one translation simply means that there thing. Eric Shipton's 1951 photographs of an 18-inch footprint in the 1960 expedition of Sir Edmund Hillary, conqueror of Everest, stirred public interest in the Yeti to a fever pitch, especially when Hillary brought back a skull cap reported to be made of Yeti hide. Unfortunately for believers, it turned out to be goatskin. One of the stranger incidents of cryptozoology, Hollywood actor James Stewart had smuggled a supposed Yeti finger out of Nepal in 1959. It turns out to be a mummified human finger. Definitive proof of the Yeti's existence is yet to be discovered, and frankly, there have been few recent sightings. The best evidence for Bigfoot is probably the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, supposedly showing a female specimen ambling across a clearing in Bluff Creek, California. While many people claim it's simply a man in a monkey suit, it's never been conclusively proven to be a hoax. Some experts claim the springy gait of the creature in the film could not have been faked. Others disagree. Skeptics claim that ape-man sightings can be identified as and explained as hoaxes or misidentifications. Sightings of bears rearing up on hind leg probably account for some of these sightings, and one explanation for footprints in the snow is that prints left by small animals such as rabbits melt together in the sun to form larger marks. If you want to explain away something, it's easy to do. How do you prove a negative? According to conventional scientific thinking, modern humans, or Homo sapiens, are the only surviving members of the hominid family, which in the past included Homo erectus and Neanderthals. The discovery in 2003 of remains on the Indonesian island of Flores is attributed, a little controversially, to an extinct hominid labeled Homo floresiensis, also known as the Hobbit. Galvanized a school of thought in cryptozoology that identifies ape-men as relic hominids. As with sea serpents or the Loch Ness monster, ape-men may be prehistoric survivors managing to survive undetected in wilderness areas. And a couple even got elected to Congress. Bigfoot and Yeti, for example, could theoretically be surviving examples of Gigantopithecus, relative of early man, thought to have died out 300,000 years ago. While descriptions of the Alma, an ape-man reported in Mongolia, closely resemble Neanderthal man. Homo neanderthalis is thought to become extinct 30,000 years ago. The Orang Pendek of Sumatra could potentially be a surviving form of Homo erectus, the first hominid species to have left Africa and settled across the globe, or maybe a surviving population of Homo floresiensis. Well, let's turn from trying to track aliens on this planet. Let's talk about something known as the WOW, a signal from outer space. This dates from 1977. Came from the constellation Sagittarius, about 2.5 degrees south of Chi Sagittarii, near the M55 global cluster. 1977, a radio telescope searching the skies for broadcasts from extraterrestrial civilization picked up a very strong signal, highlighted on a blueprint with the comment, "Wow." Nature and source of this signal remain a mystery even today. Described by National Geographic as both the first and best potential evidence of communication from extraterrestrials and one of the many perplexing mysteries of science, the WOW signal was picked up by Ohio State University's now defunct Big Ear Radio Observatory at 11:16 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, August 15, 1977. Nobody noticed anything strange about Big Ear's recordings until a few days later when volunteer astronomer Jerry Ehrman, part of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligent Life project, or the SETI project, was analyzing the output from the computer printer. The way the signal worked, the way the system worked was that the radio telescope picked up radio signals with its antenna and fed them into an IBM 1130 mainframe computer. They measured the strength of the signal on a 35-point scale, with scores higher than 9 being given the letters of the alphabet. These signals are printed out on the graph paper, I can't talk, which had to be laboriously analyzed by a human volunteer. Working through the long stretches of zeros, ones, and twos that represent the background hiss of the cosmos, and we'll start to see a sequence of scores that climb from 6 to E, all the way up to U, 30 points higher than the background hiss, before subsiding back down to a 5, so that the whole sequence read 6EQUJ5, plotted on the graph. They showed a spike in a radio signal intensity that stands out from the background noise like a red flag against a white background. It's exactly what the SETI had been looking for. Eamon said, without thinking, I wrote "wow" beside it. Most significant thing we'd seen. The string of six alphanumeric values is potentially the most significant discovery in the history of the human race. Understand why it's necessary to learn more about the search for life in the universe. Early 1960s, Cornell physicists Philip Morrison and Giuseppe Cocconi developed the theory that behind what became SETI. They reasoned the best evidence to look for in the search for intelligent life would be radio signals, as it takes relatively little energy for these to travel far across the universe. At the time, one of the few natural emission frequencies known was that of the hydrogen gas, which, when it changes energy state, emits radio waves at the frequency of 1420 megahertz. Radio telescopes around the world are already looking at this frequency, and Morrison and Cocconi figured extraterrestrial civilizations aware of the natural phenomena would use this as a frequency on which to broadcast their own "we're here" signal. The WOW signal was broadcast on precisely this frequency, and when it was loud, the signal was coming from a distant transmitter and shooting across the universe in a beam. Then as the Big Ear telescope fixed to the Earth rotated through that beam, the signal would be expected to grow in intensity to a peak and then drop off as the telescope passed through the beam and out the other side. And this is precisely what this signal showed. Big Ear was listening on 50 channels at once, and the WOW signal appeared on just one of those channels. According to astronomer Robert DeGray, one of the leading experts on the WOW signal, that's just not the way natural radio sources work. Natural radio sources diffuse static across all frequencies rather than hitting at a single frequency. So it's pretty clear that this was a radio signal, not a quasar or a pulsar or some other natural radio source, of which there are millions. It's a very narrow band, very concentrated, exactly like a radio station or a broadcast from another world would look. Well, unfortunately, the excitement generated by the extraordinary signal dissipated when it proved impossible to detect again. The Big Ear telescope never found that signal again. It never heard anything as loud. Now, numerous other searches, including some by the world's largest radio telescope arrays, have failed to find the WOW signal. Pinpointing its apparent origin proved difficult because the Big Ear telescope scanned a relatively large portion of the sky, but the signal appeared to be coming from somewhere in the constellation Sagittarius, about 2.5 degrees south of the star Chi Sagittarii. And if the signal was not an alien broadcast, then what was it? The profile of the signal makes it unlikely that there had been a terrestrial source or interference, while civilian satellites are not allowed to broadcast on that frequency. Secret military transmitters would be foolish to broadcast on a frequency that the world's astronomers are scanning, and if the signal had come from the satellite, it likely had reoccurred. Eamon considered the possibility it was a terrestrial signal reflected from space junk, but now discounts this, describing the nature of the WOW signal as an open question. Skeptics point out that a data set consisting of 6 values is a weak basis on which to construct grand theories about the existence of alien civilizations, and Eamon himself is cautious. He said, I refuse to draw vast conclusions from half-vast data. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. Once again, you'll be listening to Ken Hudnall and the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great evening.